They anticipated it to be merely another routine freedom of navigation patrol. On April 24, 2025, the USS William P. Lawrence, a formidable guided missile destroyer, sliced silently through the placid waters of the Taiwan Strait. It was early morning, the seas remarkably calm, the skies brilliantly clear. Yet an invisible tension hung in the air, so dense you could almost sever it with a blade. Then China's voice resounded, not merely in rhetoric, but through a full press statement from the PLA's Eastern Theater Command, which, loosely translated, declared, "We observe you, and we are displeased." The Chinese military immediately announced the deployment of its formidable naval and air forces, specifically tasked with shadowing and issuing warnings to the American destroyer. Live updates inundated state media. Grainy footage mysteriously leaked and meticulously plotted radar tracks were publicly disseminated. The message from Beijing was unequivocally clear. You are not welcome here. In stark contrast, the U.S. response was an almost eerie radio silence. No hurried press briefings, no dramatic defiant tweets, just the USS Lawrence steadfastly maintaining her course as if nothing out of the ordinary was occurring. What China vociferously labeled as a blatant provocation, the U.S. Navy stoically categorized as routine. But this particular Tuesday was anything but routine, for that destroyer wasn't simply asserting a principle of freedom of navigation. She was deliberately navigating directly into highly contested waters that Beijing adamantly claims as its sovereign territory, a calculated maneuver that possessed the volatile potential to escalate from mere saber-rattling to outright sparks in mere seconds. So, what truly transpired out there? Was this a tense near miss, a calculated warning shot, or did it signify something far more profound? Because beneath the blaring headlines and meticulously crafted official statements, a high-stakes game of cat and missile was unfolding, where even the slightest misstep could prove catastrophic. Someone, somewhere, had to blink. The USS Lawrence, however, didn't flinch. While headlines emanating from Beijing screamed about illegal trespassing and serious provocations, the guided missile destroyer held her predetermined course with unwavering resolve, deviating not an inch from her meticulously planned transit path. There were no frantic evasive maneuvers, no sudden desperate surges in speed, just a steady deliberate glide through the strait, precisely where established international law unequivocally asserts her right to be. The message she silently conveyed was unmistakable in its defiance. We do not request permission. For the U.S. Navy, this was not an act of escalation. It was, quite simply, Tuesday. Freedom of navigation operations, or FONOPs, are standard operating procedures in contested international waters. They are the Navy's methodical way of inscribing invisible lines across the sea, boldly challenging any nation that dares to claim otherwise. The South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, U.S. destroyers have traversed them all, calmly, legally, and always with a very specific, deliberate purpose, and they never undertake such missions in isolation. As the USS Lawrence meticulously navigated her path from east to west through the Taiwan Strait, she wasn't actively broadcasting her presence, but neither was she making any effort to conceal it. Her radar signature was impeccably clean. Her automatic identification system, AIS beacon, while active, was broadcasting only general vessel information. However, high-orbiting military satellites positioned directly overhead were continuously feeding live, comprehensive situational data back to the Pentagon, eyes in the sky, complemented by ears under the water, and undoubtedly, a formidable Virginia-class submarine lurking silently somewhere nearby, riding imperceptibly beneath the waves. One does not venture into another nation's assertively claimed territory without a meticulously crafted array of contingency plans, and China was acutely aware of this strategic reality. Within mere hours of the Lawrence's complete passage, Chinese state media released startling drone footage. Grainy, yet undeniably clear clips depicting a Type 52D destroyer, one of the PLA Navy's most advanced vessels, diligently tailing the U.S. ship at a precise, calculated distance. Reports simultaneously claimed that Chinese J-16 fighters had buzzed the area, flying provocatively close but crucially, not close enough to trigger a kinetic response from the American warship. PLA Air Force pilots are notoriously eager to demonstrate their proximity, but there exists a well-defined, albeit invisible, line in the skies, and every side knows precisely where it is drawn. Because if one of those jets had flown an inch too close, if one of those PLA ships had attempted to physically obstruct the Lawrence's lawful course, the volatile situation could have spiraled catastrophically out of control with terrifying speed. The rules of engagement in the Taiwan Strait are exquisitely fine-tuned, yet inherently fragile. One erroneous radar lock, one misread maneuver, and the next sound one would hear would not be a measured diplomatic statement, but the chilling scream of the Aegis combat system going hot. If such a calamitous event were to unfold, the Chinese would certainly not be the only ones intently observing. For this precarious dance is not merely about Taiwan's sovereignty. It is about unequivocally asserting who retains the inherent right to traverse international waters without requiring a hall pass. And the United States, in this high-stakes confrontation, did not deploy its assets merely to play defense. The USS Lawrence successfully completed her transit in less than 12 hours, with no reported incident and no deviation from her planned route. Make no mistake, the ensuing silence was not indicative of peace. It was the ominous quiet of pressure building, and the next strategic move was already ominously underway. Just as the USS William P. Lawrence gracefully disappeared into the Pacific haze, another critical pressure point ominously illuminated, a few hundred miles to the south on the opposite side of the formidable Luzon Strait. Warships were once again on the move. The Philippines and the United States were simultaneously launching Exercise Balikatan, their largest and most ambitious joint military drill to date. This massive undertaking involved more than 14,000 troops, dozens of sophisticated ships, cutting-edge fighter jets, powerful missile batteries, and extensive amphibious assault rehearsals meticulously conducted across both land and sea. The precise timing was no mere coincidence. Within hours of China's public announcement that it had successfully shadowed and warned the U.S. destroyer, U.S. Marines were conspicuously unloading advanced HIMARS rocket systems onto a pristine Philippine beach. This was unequivocally a potent show of force, but it was also a direct, unmistakable message to Beijing. We're not just sailing through the Taiwan Strait. We're establishing formidable firing positions strategically positioned just over the horizon. In the lexicon of military planning, this calculated maneuver is termed shaping the battle space, and China was paying rapt attention. This was particularly pertinent, given that Beijing had just recently flexed its own formidable naval muscles a few days prior. A powerful carrier strike group, led by the Shandong, one of the PLA Navy's most modern and capable aircraft carriers, had just deliberately cruised past the Philippines' northern coast, well within the country's exclusive economic zone. This provocative move sent a palpable jolt through Manila, prompting immediate heightened air patrols and intensive radar sweeps. The implicit message from China was chillingly clear. We possess the capability to flank you from both strategic sides. Yet the Philippines resolutely refused to back down. While the PLA was busily releasing self-serving propaganda footage of their intercepts, U.S. Pacific Command was diligently compiling exhaustive ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance data from its array of satellites, advanced drones, and surface vessels. Every single maneuver, every flyover, every tailing ship, all meticulously logged, tagged, and filed. And behind every polite diplomatic statement emanating from the Pentagon, a quiet, profound question was being earnestly whispered in the austere planning rooms stretching from Okinawa to Guam. How far is China genuinely willing to go this time? Because if these intricate exercises were no longer mere war games, if this represented the ominous opening act of something far more dire, then every single move, every destroyer's passage, every joint drill, every carrier group deployment was not just a deterrent. It was a chilling dress rehearsal for an unthinkable conflict. Just beyond the meticulously orchestrated political theater and all the flashing headlines, steel was moving rapidly across the vast expanse of the sea. Beijing did not overtly blink, but neither did it maintain its silence. As the USS Lawrence exited the Taiwan Strait and U.S. and Allied forces conspicuously ramped up their joint exercises just offshore, the Chinese Communist Party abruptly kicked into overdrive. The PLA's Eastern Theater Command promptly issued a second official statement, this time notably sharper, undeniably louder, and far more direct. The words illegal, provocative, and irresponsible were no longer mere suggestions. They were unequivocally delivered as direct accusations. In state media, anchors clad in Navy uniforms issued stern warnings of hostile infiltration. PLA mouthpieces vociferously denounced the destroyer's transit as a dangerous show of muscle, explicitly intended to intimidate and disrupt regional peace. But beneath the dramatic, inflammatory language lay something far colder and more calculated, the deliberate framing of a meticulously constructed narrative. China wasn't merely upset that a U.S. warship had traversed what they assert as their sovereign territory. They were seething with indignation that it had done so without seeking their explicit permission. You see, in Beijing's unilateral view, the Taiwan Strait is fundamentally not international water. It is unequivocally a domestic corridor, an integral part of what they unilaterally claim as their internal sea. And they have toiled relentlessly for years to meticulously convince the global community that the established rules governing this waterway are fundamentally different, that freedom of navigation simply does not apply there, and that warships from Western nations inherently require their explicit permission to pass. But international law, fundamentally, asserts otherwise. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, which even China has formally signed, explicitly recognizes the Taiwan Strait as an international waterway, unequivocally open to transit. And the U.S., in unwavering defiance of Beijing's claims, treats it as a high-traffic highway, no different than the Strait of Gibraltar or the English Channel. This fundamental clash of definitions is not merely a semantic dispute. It is, at its core, a clash of opposing doctrines. Because if the world were to accept Beijing's assertion that the Taiwan Strait is Chinese territory, then every future transit by a foreign warship would instantaneously become an escalation, a diplomatic incident, a potent bargaining chip in China's favor. But if the U.S. steadfastly continues sailing through unchallenged, unapologetic, then Beijing's carefully constructed narrative begins to irretrievably erode. And right now, the U.S. isn't just sailing through. It's doing so while regional allies conduct live-fire exercises to the south, and advanced ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms meticulously map every inch of the coastline to the north. This strategic confluence is no coincidence. It is a deliberate, synchronized counter-pressure. So, while Beijing continues to display bombastic footage of J-16s flying aggressive combat patrols near Taiwan and warships conspicuously shadowing American destroyers, the underlying reality is far less cinematic and considerably more strategic. They are attempting to dictate the tempo of engagement, but that tempo proves exceedingly difficult to maintain when one is perpetually reacting. And China, in this unfolding geopolitical drama, was undeniably reacting. Reacting to the destroyer's transit, reacting to the joint military drills, reacting to the unsettling realization that its own coastline was no longer an impenetrable wall, but a vulnerable window. And through that window, the U.S. Navy was intently observing. The Taiwan Strait remained outwardly calm. By the time the USS William P. Lawrence successfully cleared the eastern edge of the strait, the entire region wasn't simply holding its collective breath. It was intently watching for the next strategic move. This scrutiny was not conducted through speeches or diplomatic pronouncements, but with satellites, with sonar, with the kind of intense, all-encompassing vigilance one applies only when everyone strongly suspects that something far larger is ominously approaching. Because here's the unvarnished truth. A single transit, by itself, did not physically alter the map, but it profoundly altered the tone. It subtly, yet undeniably, shifted the geopolitical rhythm, And in the intricate dance of international relations, rhythm profoundly matters. In Beijing, the PLA immediately began rotating its naval assets faster than their usual operational tempo. Frigates that had been previously docked for routine maintenance were suddenly dispatched to sea. Aerial patrols intensified dramatically. Even civilian ferries traversing the Taiwan Strait began reporting inexplicable, unmarked radar interference, possibly signals emanating from airborne early warning systems meticulously sweeping for U.S. submarines. And on the American side, Strike Group 5 showed no signs of slowing its formidable pace. The USS Lawrence seamlessly rejoined its massive formation, which prominently included the aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson, steaming resolutely eastward, with a formidable escort wall of steel and omnipresent eyes in every direction. In the air, P-8 Poseidons meticulously looped over potential launch corridors, their onboard radars ceaselessly scanning for any signs of missile signatures, surface skimmers, or, even more ominously, coordinated swarms. And in the midst of all this strategic maneuvering, Taiwan quietly but decisively upgraded its defense posture. There were no blaring sirens, no public press briefings, just subtle, yet highly significant operational moves. More intercept flights by ROC, Republic of China jets, a discernible increase in activity around known radar sites, logistics hubs running hotter than usual, and even the roads leading to mountainous bunkers witnessing an uncharacteristic surge in military traffic. Everyone, it seemed, was preparing. Because while no missiles were physically launched and no shots were fired, the fundamental rules of the game had undeniably shifted. Before this transit, China operated under the ingrained assumption that the US was inherently risk-averse in the region, that Washington would inevitably flinch at any significant escalation, that a sufficiently loud enough warning would invariably cause hesitation. But the USS Lawrence did not hesitate. It transited the strait with a clinical professionalism that bellowed one thing loud and clear: we are not asking. And if that assertive posture becomes the new geopolitical norm, then China's entire convoluted strategy, its elaborate bluffing game, its insidious gray zone operations, its incremental salami slicing of strategic control, begins inexorably to unravel. Because when your adversary ceases to fear your reaction, you irrevocably lose your leverage. Beijing understands this critical dynamic. That is precisely why their propaganda was so deafeningly loud. That is precisely why their flyovers were pushed to the very precipice of too close. That is precisely why the video of a PLA destroyer conspicuously tailing the Lawrence was played on a continuous loop in state news, as if to desperately assert, we are still in control. But true control in this high-stakes arena isn't merely about tailing a ship. It is about fundamentally shaping what that ship chooses to do next. And right now, the only entities actively shaping movement in the region are prominently wearing US Navy patches,